They say that objects treated with care end up housing souls. So what do you suppose becomes of the things we throw away? What sort of souls find refuge in the trash? That's the thought that sets this story in motion. It begins with a child, saddened by the sight of her torn stuffed animal. Her mother, thinking it would look shabby even if she stitched it back together, decides to toss it out and buy a new one instead. She heads to the garbage depot near their home, drops a bag of refuse straight down to the underground, and walks away. All the while, a hooded figure watches from the shadows. In this world, much like our own, people are quick to turn objects into garbage, treating them as worthless, filthy things. The same logic, unfortunately, often applies to people, too. After watching the scene unfold, the hooded figure heads down to the underground, where all the city's trash is processed. A guard spots the intruder and immediately points his weapon. The hooded stranger is known here as the dump thief, the villain who steals garbage and threatens the city's pristine image. The guard triggers the alarm, and 2 more armed soldiers rush in for backup. The thief hurls trash bags at them, buying just enough time to make a break for it. Even so, more guards catch up and open fire. With almost superhuman agility, this mysterious youth dodges every bullet, weaving, leaping, and rolling through the chaos to escape. When even more guards join the fray, the thief takes a grazing shot but still manages to slip away through the sewers. Back on the surface, the thief grumbles about always being called a thief. He doesn't see himself that way at all. The next day, in the town square, 2 women gossip about the news spreading around the dump thief struck again last night. One insists the criminal must be a tribal, but the other nudges her to hush up when she notices a tribal man listening in. When he leaves, the women make it clear they'd rather that kind of person never set foot in their part of town again. The man walks through the city's beautiful district until he reaches the slums, the place he calls home. The border between the 2 worlds is marked by a towering wall, impossible to ignore. In the slum, the houses are ugly and dirty, and the poor shuffle through the foul-smelling streets. Even here, people are abuzz about the dump thief, certain his antics will bring the apostles down on their neighborhood any day now. Meanwhile, Rudo, busy fixing up things he scavenged from the trash, gets a scolding from his friend Chiwa. Once again, he's been poking his nose where it doesn't belong, and no one can say what the authorities might do if they catch him. Everyone in these parts knows just how seriously the city takes its garbage laws. Chiwa wishes she could understand why her friend keeps risking it. Rudo explains, the rich toss away perfectly good things without a second thought, and he can't help but feel sorry for them. Besides, he needs the money to survive. Chiwa teases that he really must love trash. Rudo is about to protest, but a group of scowling kids shows up before he can get a word out. Their leader immediately mocks Rudo's stink and filthy gloves, warning Chiwa that she'll catch the smell if she hangs around with him. Another boy kicks the lamp Rudo was fixing, sneering that no one would buy anything a grubby guy like him touches. Chiwa sticks up for her friend, pointing out that none of them are so different. The bullies won't have it, insisting Chiwa should stay away from a kid like Rudo, especially since he's the son of a deranged murderer. The way they see it, this slum was built to hold criminals, and they've all tried to behave to erase the stigma. But that effort went up in smoke when Rudo's father killed a bunch of people. Hearing this, Rudo fixes a furious stare on the ringleader, radiating pure hatred. Terrified, the kid tries to prove to everyone that this is exactly the look of a criminal. Sweating bullets and muttering, like father, like son, the bullies slink away, but not before warning that Rudo will end up a killer just like his old man. With the trio gone, Chiwa tries to comfort her friend. She tells Rudo she believes in him, he's not a bad person, and he'd never hurt anyone. Then she spots the stuffed animal he salvaged from the dump and immediately falls in love with it. Seeing how much she likes it, Rudo tries to tell her it's a gift, but his voice is too soft, and before he can get the words out, Chiwa's mother calls her away. As always, the woman warns her daughter to stay away from Rudo, but Chiwa stands up for him, kicking himself for his lack of courage. The misunderstood Rudo trudges home, head down. There, he runs into Recto, the tribal man humiliated by the women in the city square. Recto teases Rudo about not managing to give Chiwa the stuffed animal, which makes Rudo freak out when he realizes Recto saw everything. Dropping the joke, Recto urges Rudo to be more direct about what he wants. Then, switching gears, he asks Rudo to explain exactly what happened during last night's trash run. Recto thinks Rudo is taking too many risks for money, he's still too young, and could get himself into serious trouble. Rudo argues that he'd never been caught before, but Recto reminds him that doesn't change the fact he nearly got killed, even though they're not related by blood. Recto sees them as family. He took Rudo in when he was just a baby, abandoned by everyone else. Rudo recognizes the bond and understands why his adoptive father worries. He owes him a debt of gratitude he'll never forget. So, Recto says that if the kid is as honest with Chiwa as he is with everyone else, she's bound to fall for him. Nervous, Rudo almost drops the lantern when he hears that. And in the process, his surrogate father spots the graze from a bullet wound on his arm. Recto's face grows serious as he insists on tending to the wound, and while he's at it, he decides to change the bandages on the boy's hand too. As he asks Rudo to take off his gloves, Recto pleads with him not to go back to the dump. No one can predict what might happen if he does. Rudo shrugs it off, insisting the injury was nothing especially compared to the scars his real father left on his hands. Recto, suddenly somber, reminds him that in this city, the law has always been clear. Anyone who commits a serious crime is sentenced to death on the spot and thrown into the abyss. That's where Rudo's father ended up. For that reason, Recto warns, the boy has to be extra careful not to meet the same fate. For as long as he can remember, Rudo's hands have been pitch black, marked by unbearable pain that would strike without warning, and by the looks of disgust people shot his way at how hideous his wounds were. The boy's mental state had already been shattered from a young age. Then, one day, Recto gave him the gloves Rudo still wears to this day. They were already old and worn out when he got them, but the pain started to fade little by little. Because of that, Rudo feels he owes this man a debt he can never repay. Finally, Recto teases his not-so-official son, telling him that if he really wants to win Chiwa over, he'll have to move fast, otherwise someone else will swoop in and steal that pretty girl away. With that in mind, he advises Rudo to finally give her the stuffed animal, and who knows, maybe even steal a kiss from the princess while he's at it. Of course, shy as ever, Rudo reacts a bit aggressively, his angry shouts echoing outside where, unbeknownst to them, a shadowy figure lurks in the filthy alleyways, right near their door. Recto tries everything to get the kid to crack a smile. Rudo had the grumpiest face around. If he couldn't laugh for real, Recto said, then fake it. Pretend to be someone else. Act. Do whatever it takes. The important thing was to seem friendlier, so the pretty girl would start feeling closer to him. But that was easier said than done. Rudo had no trust in those wild, blood-red eyes of his, which seemed to stir every emotion in people except sympathy. As he walks through the slum, Rudo reflects on what people say. The abyss is a massive landfill, the final destination for all trash and for everyone who commits a crime. Speaking of which, the boy happens upon another city resident being sentenced in the most secluded corner of the favela, thrown forever into the pit alongside all the other waste just like his father, or so they say. As the criminal is condemned, the frenzied crowd around him chants over and over, "Into the abyss with the filth. Into the abyss with the filth." Right then, Chiwa jumps out and scares him half to death, leaving him flustered in front of the girl he likes. She explains that the ghetto was built on the city's edge, right next to the abyss, to remind the poor every single day that they, too, could end up in that pit if they slip up. Like it or not, if you live in the ghetto, you'll end up witnessing an execution sooner or later. And by the way, she says she doesn't want Rudo to be thrown in there and tells him he should listen to Recto more, because he cares about him too. Hearing the word too, Rudo figures Chiwa is hinting that she likes him as well. When he brings it up, they both get lost in an awkward, blushing back and forth until Chiwa notices the stuffed bunny in his hands. With nowhere to run, he gives her the toy, saying the bunny would be much happier with her than in the trash. Right after that, completely frazzled, he bolts off to tell Recto what just happened, dying to see his surrogate father's reaction. On his way back, he bumps into the apostles patrolling the slum again, making everyone nervous. Bursting through his front door, Rudo swears he saw Recto at the entrance only to realize, too late, that his dear friend was being murdered by the same mysterious figure who'd been stalking their home the night before. In a panic, Rudo attacks the killer, but he's easily overpowered and left injured, forced to watch helplessly as the murderer escapes. Barely alive, Recto calls out to his adopted son, urging him to run for his life. But paralyzed by fear and anger, Rudo wants nothing more than to stay and save his friend. Summoning his last bit of strength, Recto makes it clear, the boy's real mission is to change this rotten world. Suddenly, a stun gun goes off. Apostles burst into the house, pinning the murder on Rudo and arresting him for homicide. Rudo desperately tries to explain, but no one will listen. And Rikto is already as good as dead, unable to defend the poor boy. The apostles beat him viciously as he tries to shield himself. And finally, one of the officers punches Rudo hard enough to knock him out cold. Outside, neighbors whisper to each other that Rudo finally killed someone, confirming their suspicions that he'd follow in his father's murderous footsteps. Among them, Chiwa can hardly believe her best friend was capable of something like that. Without delay, Rudo is dragged off to be sentenced at the city's edge. Accused of committing a heinous crime in this so-called Holy Land and now recognized as the infamous trash thief, which only makes his situation even worse than it already was. Given the circumstances, the young man was sentenced to death without much delay. The crowd around him shouted with relish, "Into the abyss with the filth! Into the abyss with the filth!" Dressed in religious robes, the one responsible for passing the sentence declared that all filth must be swallowed by the abyss, and as Rudo was shoved toward the pit, he wondered why this was happening to him. He hadn't done anything to deserve it. Even though he was too afraid to speak, he begged in silence to be heard, to be saved, but all he got in return were hateful stares from people he'd never even met. People who had no idea what had really happened. Yet, among them, there was one familiar face, Chiwa, who lowered her head in a mix of shame and outrage. In one last act of defiance, Rudo yelled for Chiwa to find the real culprit behind Rikto's murder, but keeping her icy composure, she simply regretted ever believing in the trash thief. Now, she knew like father, like son. With those words, she tossed away the stuffed animal Rudo had given her and walked off. Seething with resentment, the condemned boy muttered that the real filth were these people judging him, a bunch of nobodies with no minds of their own. A mob that refused to see or listen, even when they had eyes and ears. Finally, Rudo spotted Rikto's killer in the crowd, but before he could do anything, he was thrown into the abyss. As he fell, he vowed to drag every last one of them to hell, swearing to kill all of humanity, the hatred consuming him as the darkness swallowed his mind whole. Some time later, the trash thief slowly opened his eyes, coming to atop a pile of garbage bags. Overwhelmed by the unbearable stench, he looked around and saw a vast world made entirely of refuse, nothing but trash stretching all the way to the horizon and beyond. Suddenly, a colossal creature made of filth loomed before him, and Rudo's eyes filled with terror as he realized the true meaning of hell. Reflecting on his world, Rudo had always found it strange how everyone was so obsessed with cleanliness and catching criminals, yet never seemed to care about what happened to things that fell into the abyss. Most people would question what went through someone's mind to commit a crime, knowing they'd be thrown into the abyss as punishment. Speaking of which, at this very moment, Rudo is running for his life, desperately fleeing from a monstrous, towering creature made entirely of trash. But it doesn't stay alone for long. With a single roar, the first beast calls others to join the hunt. Suddenly, Rudo finds himself surrounded, so tiny compared to the massive creatures closing in on him. One lunges, jaws wide, but he dodges by a hair. What follows is a relentless barrage of attacks, forcing him to give everything he's got just to avoid being leaving him wondering why on earth anyone would throw a person into such a nightmarish place. Suddenly, the pile of garbage beneath his feet collapses, sending him crashing down and leaving him even more exposed. To make matters worse, the air is so foul that it feels like his lungs will turn to ash if he keeps breathing it in. Searching frantically for an escape, Rudo spots a path that looks somewhat clear ahead. But as he glances around, every single route seems to end in nothing but more trash. The realization fills him with a bone-chilling dread, so much so that he vomits blood, the noise attracting the attention of the monstrous beasts. At that moment, unable to get back on his feet, Rudo is struck by the certainty that he's about to die, never getting the chance to do everything he wanted. Suddenly, a vision of his adoptive father, Rikto, flashes before his eyes, an apparition of the man's death, playing out in his mind until Rikto himself shouts, "No!" The word jolts something in Rudo, and all around him, metal bars lying in the dump start to gleam as if calling out to him. In that instant, Rudo decides he still has one thing left to do. He grabs a metal bar and swears revenge on the bastards who threw him here. But above all, he vows to hunt down the scum who killed Rikto. First, though, he has to survive this hellish place. Fueled by rage, Rudo charges at the trash beasts with a ferocity he never knew he had, landing blows that should have been impossible for someone like him, demonstrating an almost unreal strength that allows him to stand toe-to-toe with these overwhelming enemies. Using whatever he can find, street signs, pieces of metal roofing, Rudo manages to deal enough damage to actually take some of the monsters down. After this unthinkable feat, Clutching one of his improvised weapons, Rudo drops to his knees, still suffering from the stench of that putrid wasteland. And as if things couldn't get any worse, the last thing he wanted happens. Another trash beast appears, ready to attack. This time, Rudo moves with even more caution, sprinting at full speed to put some distance between them. But the monster slams its foot down, sending tons of garbage flying and isolating Rudo, dragging him along with the debris. After such a brutal assault, Rudo seems finished. But, to his surprise, someone else is there to intervene. A mysterious man wearing a gas mask and carrying an umbrella grabs Rudo and punts him to the other side of the dump like a soccer ball, as if to balance things out. The stranger then slips a gas mask over Rudo's face, an unexpected gesture that only deepens the mystery of who this guy is. Rudo fires off a barrage of questions. Is he from here? What is this place? What are those monsters? But instead of answering, the man just tells the kid to keep his voice down. Rudo, anxious and half out of his mind, can't focus on what the man is saying. Actually, between the mask and the environment, it's almost impossible to hear anything. So Rudo literally can't make out the guy's words. Frustrated, he starts speaking louder and louder until the stranger finally loses his patience and yells back, explaining that this isn't the underworld. It's the surface, and all this trash was dumped here by those damned celestials up above, who don't care about polluting someone else's home. And now, thanks to Rudo, the monsters know exactly where they are. They're drawn to sound. These things are blighted beasts, creatures made of garbage that can regenerate using everything around them, meaning you can't destroy them with ordinary weapons. Just then, as one of the blighted beasts closes in, ready to devour them both, the masked man wraps his umbrella in flames, turning it into something much more dangerous. Now that he's vented his frustration, he seems almost relaxed. It's time for a little cleanup. As a barrage of trash is hurled his way, he spins his umbrella, knocking every projectile aside, and the damage his weapon inflicts actually prevents the beast from regenerating. All around, more blighted beasts appear, but the man doesn't back down for a second. On the contrary, seeing the monsters charging at him, he meets them head-on, cutting them down as if his umbrella were a legendary blade. Rudo watches in disbelief, wondering if it's the weapon that's special or the man wielding it. Either way, with that kind of power, he could finally take his revenge on the fiends from the surface who did this to him. With just one blighted beast left, it gathers a blob of purple slime in its mouth and spits it at the umbrella man, who shields himself and counters with a savage attack. Unbreaker, eightfold slash. The blow is devastating, decapitating the beast and unleashing a second explosion that obliterates its entire body, bringing the brutal fight to an end. Job done. The man gathers up his umbrella and checks on the lost boy. Rudo asks who he is, so the man removes his helmet and mask and introduces himself. Jin, just a humble janitor. The second he takes off his mask, the stench hits him full force, and he curses Rudo for making him do something so insane, while Rudo, for his part, just passes out cold. In the next scene, we see a childhood memory of the young boy. He comes home from school covered in filth after getting beaten up by some classmates just because he'd said that things are alive. Regto asks if he fought back, and the boy says no, which, in truth, is exactly the answer his tutor wanted to hear. Rudo remembers something Regto once told him. If you treat an object with care for a long time, it can eventually develop a soul. When he sees the kid taking that literally, thinking that things are actually alive, Regto explains that it's just a legend people made up. A story meant to teach folks to take good care of their belongings. But deep down, the man admits he actually believes in it. As he wipes the boy clean with a towel, he jokes that maybe it's only so good at cleaning Rudo because it has a soul. So Rudo points to everything around the house and asks if those things have souls too. Regto laughs and says it's possible, leaving the little boy wide-eyed, staring at his gloves and wondering if maybe they have souls as well. Regto goes on to say that if the boy treats them with care, someday they definitely will. At that moment, Rudo wakes up from his dream, finding himself chained to the floor. He sees the masked man and calls him a piece of crap. Jin, unfazed, asks if that's any way to talk to someone who just saved his life. As Rudo is dragged along by his chains, he demands to know what this so-called savior plans to do with him now. The mysterious custodian replies that he's doing the kid a favor by carrying him since Rudo was passed out cold. Furious, Rudo yells that he needs to go back upstairs, but the man just shrugs and says that's not going to happen. What Rudo calls upstairs, the people down here call paradise, and getting to paradise isn't easy, especially since the place is always shifting. There are other reasons too, but Jin isn't ready to share them yet. He keeps dragging Rudo along, telling him to take this chance to rest. Growing more impatient, Rudo insists he's going back, no matter what Injin says. Besides, Injin's choice of words, "for now, it's impossible," makes it obvious he knows a way to reach paradise. Getting more riled up, the boy demands to be taught everything about this place and about the power Injin used earlier, because he plans to use those abilities to get revenge on the person who killed his father. Hearing this, Injin finally takes off his helmet and admits he's sick of this brat yapping non-stop. But since the kid's so eager, he'll show him exactly what kind of place this is. So Injin drags Rudo to an old, abandoned gas station, leaves him there, and says, "Now it's all up to you." Of course, Rudo has no clue what's going on. But there's no time to stand around questioning things. As he's left alone, he sees masked men climbing out of trucks parked at the station. One of them, suspicious that someone else might be with the kid, is shocked to see a child in a place like this. Noticing Rudo's clothes, he guesses he must be a Celestial, and asks where he's from. When Rudo says he's from paradise, all the men pull off their masks and start acting like they've just stumbled upon a god or something. It's like a miracle, finding someone from paradise down here. Since the boy speaks their language, some think he's trying to trick them. But the man in front insists he's telling the truth. This same guy starts to unchain Rudo, making the kid think these people are way nicer than that Injin character. But in the next scene, we see their real plan. The men actually want to chain up the Celestial inside one of the trucks so he can't escape, since a body like his is worth a fortune. In fact, a whole Celestial fetches a high price, but there are buyers for just the part, too. Eyes, arms, legs, even the clothes. The leader of the gang explains that people buy Celestials because everyone hates them. Paradise dumps all its trash down here, turning the land toxic, spawning monsters, and making life here nearly impossible with violence, chaos, and pollution. That's why the bandits are eager to see what their buyer will do once he gets his hands on Rudo. But to make sure the Celestial doesn't starve before he's sold, the boss shoves a handful of rotten garbage into his mouth, mocking how the pretty boy from paradise probably isn't used to food from the dump. Wearing a twisted smile, the bandit forces the trash down Rudo's throat, but Rudo bites back, sinking his teeth into the guy's hand and tearing flesh off 2 of his fingers. Not wanting to be outdone, the Celestial chews up the raw flesh, skin and all, then takes a big bite out of the food the bandits gave him, coolly declaring it's still perfectly edible. The grotesque scene leaves the men stunned. Rudo declares that all humans are the same, whether they're from paradise or the surface. Everyone is capable of terrible things, and people will always split themselves into whatever categories suit them best. Fueled by rage and a strange power flaring around him, Rudo breaks free from the chains holding his hands, announcing that he can't just stand by and watch while others do whatever they want. Meanwhile, Injin looks on, grinning as Rudo carves an X of magical energy into the floor, proof that the custodian was right about the kid. In that moment, Rudo recalls again what Regto said, that things can gain a soul if they're cherished for a long time. Watching carefully, Injin notes that someone with the power to give life to objects is called a giver, and that's exactly what Rudo is. But the bandit leader isn't about to let go of such valuable cargo, so he orders his men to kill the Celestial if they have to. Immediately, the men charge at Rudo with knives, but he responds with a devastating swing of his chain powerful enough to crush anyone caught off guard. Seeing this, one of the enemy shouts for the others to target the giver's chains, insisting that people like him can only give strange powers to their own things. Not long after, a bandit manages to strike the shackle connected to the chain and disarm the boy. But Rudo moves fast, grabbing a tire and breathing life into it, as well to the misery of his opponents, and the delight of Injin, who watched the fight from the sidelines. In the end, after thrashing the henchman with a newly empowered tire, the giver steps up to the gang's leader, who is shouting, demanding to know who this kid is. The criminal curses him every which way. But as Rudo prepares to land the final blow, Injin steps in and tells him to cool it. At that, the giver's red eyes fade, and all the objects floating around him drop to the ground. A brick even lands square on the bandit's head, knocking him out cold. Stunned, Rudo tries to make sense of what just happened. It's only when he remembers Ricto's words that something seems to click inside his mind somehow. It allowed all this to happen through the gloves. Noticing the blood dripping from the boy's nose, Injin remarks that it must be tough to handle that much power inside. Speaking of which, the whole point of the caretaker's plan was to see if the giver truly possessed that ability. And now that everything's been revealed, he's ready to explain everything about the world down below, and about the power Rudo has discovered. In return, Injin wants Rudo to become a caretaker. But when he hears the offer, thinking it over for a few seconds with blood still running from his nose, the boy simply answers, "No, I really don't want to." Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.